Okay, let's unpack this. Picture a city, right? Built mostly of wood, just booming with energy, but also, well, completely vulnerable.
Yeah, kind of a tinderbox waiting to happen.
Exactly. Then, boom, one night it's practically wiped out by fire. But here's the twist, the really interesting part. From that devastation, something truly transformative emerges.
Hmm.
A blueprint. Not just for rebuilding, but for, inventing the modern city and even the structures that define skylines, everywhere.
What's so remarkable about Chicago's story, and it comes through in the sources, is how catastrophe didn't just destroy, it actually created an opportunity.
Right.
That blank slate, as you called it, it propelled innovation.
Yeah.
And planning on a scale that, well, it changed urban development forever.
Totally. So today we're taking a deep dive into Chicago. And this isn't just like a history lesson about one city. It's really a story about resilience, about audacious vision, and also the complex dance between these grand plans and the messy reality on the ground.
Yeah, that tension is key.
We've pulled together a whole stack of articles, research, notes, you name it, specifically for this deep dive, all focused on how Chicago's architecture and urban planning history shaped it, made it the city it is today.
And our mission, really, is to sift through all that material, pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge for you.
Yeah, give you that shortcut.
Exactly. A shortcut to understanding this incredibly dynamic urban narrative, from its dramatic rebirth, all the way to its global influence. And we'll hit some surprising facts along the way, I think.
Ready. We're starting right at the beginning, in the fire and the crucible it created.
Okay, so to really get Chicago's story, you have to picture it back in the mid-1800s. It was just exploding with growth, a massive hub for commerce, industry.
But growing fast meant building fast, right?
Yeah.
And cheap.
And mostly out of wood.
Yeah.
That rapid expansion meant corners were cut. The city fabric was largely timber.
Which just made it incredibly vulnerable. The sources really paint this picture of a city just waiting for disaster.
And it came. October 1871, the Great Chicago Fire.
Yeah.
The numbers are just staggering when you look at them.
Yeah, something like 17,500 buildings gone.
Roughly, yes. And the economic loss, well, estimates put it in the billions in today's money. It was catastrophic.
It wiped out this huge chunk of the city, especially that commercial heart.
It did. But what followed wasn't just despair. It was incredible resilience, unity even. The rebuilding effort started almost immediately. There was this fierce determination to build back, but stronger, better.
And this is where the real catalyst of change kicks in, isn't it? The fire just starkly exposed the danger of all that wood construction.
Absolutely. It forced them really to adopt new materials, fire-resistant stuff, brick, terracotta, and crucially, steel.
Steel. And you combine that with the situation in the commercial core, the buildings are gone, but the land, still incredibly valuable.
Exactly. They couldn't just spread out endlessly. So you have these new materials, plus this intense need to maximize that valuable footprint. Development had to go up.
It's like a pressure cooker.
Right. And that pressure cooker environment right there in Chicago post-fire, that's where you really see the birth of the skyscraper happening. It's driven by necessity as much as invention.
And it wasn't just the buildings. The fire also pushed significant planning changes, didn't it?
Yes. They started thinking more deliberately about the city structure, integrating wider boulevards, creating new parks, looking at transportation networks, reinforcing a more orderly street grid in the burnt-out zones.
One source called it creative destruction, clearing space that actually, maybe unintentionally, helped new industries grow.
It's a fascinating concept. And amidst all this rebuilding energy, a figure starts to emerge who becomes absolutely central to Chicago's story. Daniel Burnham. Initially an architect, but already thinking bigger about the city's form.
Okay, now let's jump forward. Just over 2 decades. The city hasn't just recovered, it's thriving. It's ready to show itself off to the world.
1893. Chicago hosts the World's Columbian Exposition in Jackson Park. And this thing was massive. Over 600 acres, 26 million visitors came. Huge.
Officially, it was celebrating Columbus, right, 400 years. But really, it was Chicago saying, look at us, we're a major global city.
That was the statement. And the heart of that statement was the famous White City.
The White City, yeah. The sources describe it as designed to be the absolute opposite of the gritty industrial reality of most 19th century cities.
Completely. It was grand neoclassical architecture, following those Beaux-Arts principles, symmetry, balance, splendor. It was intentionally the antithesis, as one source puts it, of the cluttered, chaotic, smoke-filled city just outside the gates.
And who is the guy pulling the strings, making this vision happen?
Daniel Burnham again. He was the chief of construction, the director of works. His talent for organizing, for managing this massive, complex project, he was put to the ultimate test there. And he delivered.
And the influence of the exposition was just huge, wasn't it? It directly sparked the City Beautiful movement across the country.
Absolutely. It became this national push to bring aesthetic grandeur, order, civic pride into urban spaces. It showed people that comprehensive planning, creating harmonious, beautiful, and functional spaces, was actually achievable on a massive scale.
People were impressed by the scale, the order. What
The
else?
sanitation systems, actually. The integration of water features, the transformative use of electricity, which was still quite new and dramatic then. Visitors took those lessons, those images, back to their own cities. The White City was a powerful counter-narrative, projecting order and progress.
Okay, so you've got the post-fire grid and infrastructure improvements kind of driven by necessity. And then you have the exposition's planned classical beauty driven by vision. What's the common thread?
Order. Both reflect this powerful societal desire for order.
Oh, okay.
Our sources really point this out. It was a reaction, a response to the rapid, sometimes really chaotic growth of 19th century industrial cities. It was this yearning for control, for legibility, for a sense of civic dignity amidst all the tumult.
Though it's probably worth remembering, as one source notes, this vision of order often came from the top down, right?
Yes, very much so. Sometimes reflecting the anxieties of the elites about social change, immigration, all that. And maybe not always perfectly tuned in to the diverse needs of everyday communities on the ground.
And that tension, the grand vision versus the street-level reality, that seems like a recurring theme in Chicago's story.
It absolutely is, which leads us perfectly to the man who perhaps embodied that grand vision more than anyone, Daniel H. Burnham. Architect, planner, visionary, and, as one source calls him, maybe the most successful power broker American architecture ever produced.
Quite a claim. So Burnham started out as a draftsman. Then in 1873, he partners with John Wellborn Root.
And that partnership, Burnham and Root, was legendary because their skills were so complementary. Root was the design genius, the structural innovator. Burnham was the organizer, the client manager, the guy who made sure things actually got built on time, on budget.
A dynamic duo.
Totally. And together, they were real pioneers of the early American skyscraper. They faced these unique Chicago challenges, especially that notoriously soft clay soil. How do you put a heavy, tall building on what's basically, muck?
Right. How do you do that?
Root figured it out. He devised the revolutionary floating foundation. For the Montauk building, way back in 1881-82, they used this massive concrete mat reinforced with steel rails, essentially creating a raft that could spread the building's weight over the clay hardpan beneath.
Like floating the... Like?
Kind of. It's such a breakthrough.
Yeah.
Some reports say the term skyscraper itself was coined to describe buildings like this, reaching heights that seemed impossible before on that ground.
Wow. What other big ones did they do?
Well, there's the Rookery Building, famous for its innovative iron framing, and that stunning light-filled central court, later remodeled by Frank Lloyd Wright, actually.
Oh, interesting.
And the north half of the Monadnock Building. That's a masterpiece of load-bearing masonry. Thick brick walls holding the whole thing up. It really shows Root's skill, but also the limits of that technology right before steel framing completely took over.
Sort of the peak of the old way.
Exactly. And then there's the Masonic Temple Building, completed in 92, 21 stories. One of the world's tallest at the time.
But the partnership didn't last forever.
No, tragically, Root died suddenly in 1891. A huge loss. Burnham carried on, reorganizing the firm as D.H. Burnham & Co.
But his real leap to national, even international fame was that exposition job in '93, right? Managing the White City.
Absolutely. That experience was pivotal. Managing that massive project, realizing that grand vision, it honed his skills in planning and organization on a scale few had ever attempted. It really propelled him into urban planning.
So he shifted from just buildings to whole cities.
Yes, his philosophy became grand, sweeping, transformative.
And that quote, even if maybe he didn't say it exactly like that, make no little plans.
They have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Yeah, whether he actually said it or not, it perfectly captures his ambition, his whole approach.
And he took that approach elsewhere.
Oh yes, far beyond Chicago. Most famously, he was a key member, really the driving force, behind the Macmillan Plan for Washington, D.C. in 1901-02.
Revitalizing L'Enfant's original vision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Applying those Beaux-Arts principles he loved to create the monumental core, the National Mall, the park system we recognize today. It was hugely influential.
He did plans for other cities too, right?
He did. Ambitious City, beautiful plans for Cleveland in 1903, and San Francisco in 1905, though the San Francisco one got largely derailed by the big earthquake in '06.
And the sources mention something fascinating, the Philippines.
Yes. In 1905, the American colonial government hired Burnham to develop comprehensive plans for Manila, the capital, and Baguio, the summer capital,
Wow. So exporting the city beautiful.
directly. It's a clear example of the movement becoming intertwined with American colonial aims. These plans were about modernizing, imposing order, projecting American influence through urban design, grand centers, boulevards, parks.
Even after Root's death, his firm kept producing major buildings.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know the iconic Flatiron Building in New York, that triangular shape?
Sure, everyone knows that one.
That's a D.H. Burnham and Co. design, 1901-02. And Union Station in Washington, D.C., completed in 1907, that was designed as part of the Macmillan Plan framework. Majestic Beaux-Arts Gateway.
And back in Chicago.
The massive Marshall Field and Company building, the department store, completed in 1907, a testament to their expertise in large-scale commercial architecture.
He was also a leader in the profession itself.
Very much so. Served 2 terms as president of the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, co-founded the American Academy in Rome, first chairman of the U.S. Commission of Fine Arts. He was shaping the field.
So his legacy is really this bridge, isn't it? From architect to, well, city shaper.
Exactly. Root brought the incredible design talent, but Burnham brought the vision, the organization, the power to manage huge commissions, and the leadership to establish urban planning as a distinct profession, applying skills honed in architecture to the scale of the city.
But that make no little plans ethos, it wasn't without criticism, right?
No, it inspired bold action, absolutely. But it also led to debates about whether those grand, top-down visions sometimes overlooked historical realities, community needs, the complexities already on the ground.
Which brings us right to maybe the grandest plan of all, the 1909 Plan of Chicago. What a document.
Truly a landmark in urban planning history, co-authored by Burnham and Edward H. Bennett. It was definitely a product of its time, deeply influenced by the City Beautiful movement, aiming for that order, efficiency, and civic magnificence.
And commissioned by?
Interestingly, not the city government initially, but by the Commercial Club of Chicago's really influential group of business leaders.
So, business driving city planning. What was their angle?
Well, partly practical. They saw the plan as a way to improve transportation for commerce, obviously, but also to make the city more livable, more attractive, keep the wealthy here, attract investment, and maybe impose a sense of order and civic identity on this rapidly growing, incredibly diverse, sometimes chaotic city.
Addressing real problems too, though. Traffic, pollution.
Oh, yes. Traffic was already a nightmare. Pollution from industry, slums. The plan aimed to tackle those. It represented a shift, really, from the 19th century focus on just expansion to a 20th century concern for the quality of urban life. How are we living? How can the city work better, be more beautiful?
And it was comprehensive, looking beyond just the downtown.
Absolutely. It envisioned the city and its surrounding region a 60-mile radius, and it broke down into 6 main categories, 6 core proposals.
Okay, what's number 1, the big one?
Improvement of the lakefront. This was central, maybe the most powerful idea. The quote is famous. The lakefront by right belongs to the people.
Love that.
It proposed creating miles and miles of public parkland, mostly using landfill right along the lake. An elegant front yard, accessible to everyone. Revolutionary, really.
Okay, number 2.
A regional highway system. They saw the automobile was coming, even if they didn't grasp its total dominance later. They diagrammed this network of radial and circumferential highways stretching way out, like 75 miles.
Ahead of their time there. 3.
Railway terminals. Chicago had tons of separate, competing intercity passenger stations. The plan wanted to consolidate them, west and south of the loop, and improve freight handling to free up valuable land and expand the business district.
Makes sense. 4.
New outer parks. This built on existing ideas for large parks on the city's edge, including what became the Cook County Forest Preserves, expanding green space and making it accessible.
5. Streets.
Systematic arrangement of streets, basically untangling traffic and making the city more beautiful. Proposals for new, wide arterial roads, some diagonal streets cutting across the grid like an extension of Ogden Avenue, widening key streets like Michigan Avenue and Roosevelt Road.
And the bi-level Wacker Drive, was that in there?
Yes. That specific, innovative idea for a 2-level roadway along the river came directly from the plan.
Amazing. And number 6.
Civic and cultural centers. This was the really grand, monumental part. A huge, domed civic center complex proposed out at Congress in Halsted, the administrative heart of the city. and a cultural center down in Grant Park, grouping institutions like the Field Museum, a new Art Institute building, the Carrar Library.
So the overall goal, make Chicago healthier, more efficient, beautiful, less congested.
Pretty much. Prepare for the future, keep it economically competitive, and at least in its stated aims, distribute the benefits, the parks, the improved infrastructure equitably, replacing, as they put it, ugliness and congestion with extraordinary beauty and efficiency.
But implementing something that huge, that's where the blueprint paradox comes in, right? What actually got built?
Exactly. It's a real mixed bag. Some significant parts were realized, absolutely, but others were heavily modified or just abandoned.
Successes. The lakefront, clearly.
Definitely the biggest success. It's largely as Burnham envisioned. Those key parks and the forest preserves, too. And major street improvements. Michigan Avenue's widening, creating the Mag Mile, Wacker Drive, Roosevelt Road widening, those happened.
But the failures or changes?
Well, that grand civic center at Congress and Halsted never happened. A different civic center complex emerged downtown later. Most of the railway consolidation didn't really materialize as planned, and that highway vision, completely overtaken and reshaped by the sheer dominance of the car, which the plan didn't fully anticipate.
Why the mixed record? Cost? Politics?
All of the above. The sheer cost was enormous. The timelines were decades long. There was resistance to the government taking private property. Economic shocks like the Great Depression hit funding. Political will changed, shifting the civic center location, for instance. Priorities just shifted over time.
And the social issues. Housing, poverty, segregation.
Yeah, that's a major criticism leveled later. The final published plan didn't really directly address those pressing social issues in detail, even if some early thinking touched on them. The social vision was more focused on this idea of environmental determinism, that a beautiful, ordered civic environment would foster civic pride and cohesion.
Which maybe wasn't enough on its own.
Arguably not enough to tackle deep-seated social divides.
But even with only partial implementation, the plan's impact was huge internationally.
Immense. It's widely seen as the first attempt at creating a comprehensive plan for a major U.S. city and its region. That comprehensive scope was groundbreaking. It became a model for planning efforts all over the world.
And it boosted the profession of planning itself.
Definitely. Scholars like Carl Smith call it the single most important step in the development of urban planning as a respected profession. It really established the idea that cities should and could actively plan for their futures.
And we already mentioned Burnham exporting these ideas to the Philippines.
Right. And his co-author, Bennett, went on to plan Ottawa. Walter Burley Griffin, who worked in Chicago and was influenced by this milieu, designed Australia's capital, Canberra, with clear echoes. You see parallels drawn to Haussmann's Paris, which inspired Burnham, and even imperial capital planning like New Delhi.
So this top-down comprehensive approach really caught on, especially in certain contexts.
It seemed to find fertile ground in places undergoing rapid development, or new cities, or colonial settings where a strong central authority could push through such a grand vision.
Okay, so that's the planning side. Let's switch gears slightly to the architecture itself. The Chicago School, or maybe schools.
Right. It's usually talked about as two distinct phases, or schools, not formal institutions, but these periods where Chicago just became this incredible hotbed of architectural innovation, shaped by architects, engineers, the economy, new tech, the whole context. And these eras profoundly shaped modern architecture globally.
Let's start with the first Chicago School. Late 19th, early 20th century, the commercial style.
Exactly. It really takes off after the fire, fueled by that massive rebuilding effort and the booming economy, and critically, enabled by new technologies coming out of the Industrial Revolution, especially the Bessemer process for mass-producing steel cheaply.
And the safety elevator, right, making tall buildings practical.
Absolutely. Elisha Otis's invention was key. So, key figures here. William LeBaron Jenney, often called the father of the American skyscraper.
Why him?
His home insurance building, 1884-85, it's widely considered the first tree skyscraper because it used an internal steel frame, a skeleton, to carry the building's weight, not just the exterior walls.
Ah, the skeleton frame.
Yeah, that allowed for much greater height and much larger windows. It's the beginning of the curtain wall concept, where the outer wall just hangs like a curtain off the frame.
And then there's Louis Sullivan. Huge name.
Towering figure. More than just an architect. He was a philosopher of design. Gave us that famous phrase, form ever follows function. He was searching for a truly American architectural style, moving away from European imitation. Known for his beautiful, intricate, organic ornament that felt integrated with the building's structure.
What are his key buildings?
The auditorium building is incredible, a massive complex. The Wainwright building in St. Louis, the Guarantee building in Buffalo, and in Chicago, the Carson Perry Scott department store with that amazing ornamental ironwork at the base. Plus, he mentored Frank Lloyd Wright.
Quite a legacy. Who else was key in this first school?
Sullivan's partner, Dankmar Adler, was an engineering genius, especially known for acoustics. We already talked about Burnham and Root's foundations, their groundbreaking skyscraper designs like the Reliance Building's lower floors, and firms like Halliburton and Roche, architects like Henry Hobson Richardson, Solon Beeman. It was a really vibrant scene.
So the main innovations from this first school are?
Okay, number one, steel frame construction. That's the defining breakthrough. Alive height, flexibility, big windows.
The Chicago window.
Yeah, the distinctive three-part window. Big fixed pane in the middle, two narrower opal sash windows on the sides, often set into projecting bay windows or oriel windows, lets in lots of light and air.
Root's floating foundations.
Crucial for building tall on Chicago soft clay. Fireproofing using terracotta tiles to encase the steel frame and protect it from fire. That was vital after the Great Fire. And the elevator tech, making upper floors desirable.
And the look. The aesthetic.
Emphasizing verticality. Facades that often express the grid of the steel frame beneath. Ornament? Yes, often in terracotta, but generally integrated, not just slapped on. Often a tripartite composition, a clear base, a shaft, and a distinct top or cornice, kind of like a classical column.
Okay, now jump forward, mid-20th century, the second Chicago school. Modernism arrives.
And it arrives personified, largely, by Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. The German émigré, hugely influential architect, comes to Chicago in the late 30s to head the architecture school at IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology.
And his philosophy, less is more.
Exactly. He championed this minimalist universal style, simplicity, functionalism, and honesty of materials, letting steel and glass speak for themselves. His goal was elegant, refined structures, often with open, flowing universal spaces inside, blurring interior and exterior.
What are the hallmarks of this second school style?
Okay, think clean, rectilinear forms. Minimalist. Little to no applied ornament. The beauty is in the proportions, the details, the materials. Exposed steel frames, often painted black, creating that strong grid. Glass curtain walls filling the spaces between the steel. Open, flexible interior plans.
And there was another huge engineering leap during this time, right? For super dolls.
Yes, absolutely pivotal. Came from Fazlur Khan, a brilliant structural engineer at the big architectural firm Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, or SOM. Khan developed the tube structural systems.
Tube systems, how does that work?
Instead of relying only on the interior columns like a traditional frame, Khan realized you could make the building's entire perimeter act like a hollow, rigid tube to resist wind loads, which are a huge force on tall buildings, especially in windy Chicago.
Ah, making the skin part of the structure?
Essentially, yes. There were different types, frame tubes, truss tubes, bundled tubes, but the core idea was using the perimeter structure for stiffness. This allowed buildings to go much, much higher, more efficiently, using less steel than conventional frames would have required. And it freed up the interior spaces even more.
Where did they first use this?
The first application was the DeWitt Chestnut Apartments, but it became iconic with buildings like the John Hancock Center. You can see its truss tube structure right on the exterior, those big X-braces. And the Willis Tower, formerly the Sears Tower, which uses Kahn's bundled tube concept, 9 square tubes bundled together, ending at different heights.
Revolutionary stuff. What are some other key second school buildings?
Well, Mies's own work is central. The campus buildings he designed for IIT. His incredibly elegant 860-880 Lakeshore Drive apartments, defining high-rise residential modernism. The Federal Center complex downtown. And just outside Chicago, the famous glass house, the Farnsworth House.
And besides Mies and Kahn,
The firm SOM was hugely dominant in this era, with key architects like Myron Goldsmith, Bruce Graham, who worked closely with Kahn on Hancock and Sears, Walter Netsch. It was another incredibly fertile period.
so you can really see the evolution. First school, kind of pragmatic, solving the problems of rebuilding, steel frame emerges. Second school, Mies brings this refined, minimalist aesthetic idealism from Europe. And then Kahn's engineering genius allows that aesthetic to reach literally new heights with the super talls.
That's a great summary of the trajectory.
And the international influence of both schools, huge.
Immense. The first school's invention, the steel frame skyscraper, it didn't just stay in Chicago. It co-evolved with early modernism in Europe, influenced building worldwide. You see its impact everywhere. And the second school, Mies' influence, the international style he championed, combined with Kahn's structural innovations like the tube systems that profoundly shaped global modernism and skyscraper design from the mid-century onwards. Tube systems became, and in many ways still are, fundamental for tall buildings globally.
So Chicago's role is complex. It originates this American form, the skyscraper, influences Europe, then becomes a key center for refining and propagating the international style, which was largely led by European emigres like Mies, and then exports that globally.
It's a fascinating back and forth across the Atlantic, with Chicago playing a pivotal role in both inventing and then refining key aspects of modern architecture.
Okay, we've covered the fire, the Expo, Burnham, the '09 plan, the architectural schools. What happens after that initial Burnham plan era?
The city keeps changing, right? Facing new challenges. Absolutely. The post-Burnham era sees Chicago grappling with major forces that weren't really central to that original 1909 blueprint. Things like deindustrialization, the massive shift to the suburbs, persistent racial segregation, and a growing focus on neighborhood equity.
These become the big issues for planners, even while Burnham's legacy, like the amazing lakefront, endures.
Right. Planning continues to evolve. The Chicago Plan Commission, which was formed right after the '09 plan, was initially key in implementing parts of it. The Michigan Avenue widening, Wacker Drive, getting the forest preserves established.
But later plans had different focuses.
Yes, often reacting to new pressures.
Yeah.
There was a 1958 development plan for the central area, very focused on revitalizing downtown, adapting to the decline of industry, bringing in big projects like the UIC campus, McCormick Place Convention Center, new federal buildings.
But that focus on the loop, did it neglect other areas?
That was the criticism. That this central area focus sometimes came at the expense of existing neighborhoods, sometimes involving significant displacement to make way for these large-scale institutional or commercial projects.
Then the 1966 Comprehensive Plan, the last big one for a long time.
Right, the last until the current We Will Chicago. The '66 plan reflected anxieties of the time, particularly white flight to the suburbs. It proposed ambitious residential developments. But this period, the '50s and '60s, is also heavily marked by the huge social disruption caused by urban renewal programs and massive highway construction.
And those hit minority communities hardest.
Disproportionately, yes. These projects often cut through established black and brown neighborhoods, displacing thousands of residents and businesses, destroying social fabric, and actually worsening racial segregation by creating physical barriers.
Then in the '70s, the Chicago 21 Plan, another downtown focus.
Yes. Led again by business leaders, the CCAC. It was trying to combat central city decay, the continued loss of residents and manufacturing jobs. The big idea was creating new residential neighborhoods right near the loop, like Dearborn Park built on old rail yards, specifically to attract middle and upper income households back downtown.
Did it work?
It had some success in attracting residents and boosting the tax base. But it also faced criticism for a lack of broad public input, fears it would displace lower-income residents nearby, and this perception of creating a sort of protected, almost fortress-like core separate from the rest of the city.
Fast forward to 2000, the CHA's plan for transformation, tearing down the high-rises.
A hugely ambitious and controversial plan. The aim was to deconcentrate the intense poverty in the public housing high-rises and replace them with mixed-income developments.
But the reality was complex.
Very complex. It led to the demolition of thousands of units and the displacement of a vast number of predominantly black residents. There are ongoing debates and studies about whether enough replacement housing was truly affordable, whether supportive services were adequate, and the long-term effects on those displaced communities.
But there have been positive additions to the public realm more recently.
Oh, absolutely. Millennium Park, opened in 2004, has been incredibly successful. A major public space, a huge draw, really a 21st century symbol for the city.
And the Riverwalk.
Yes, the Chicago Riverwalk, largely completed by 2016. Finally realizing that Burnham-era idea of creating public access and activity along the main branch of the river has become a really vibrant, popular space.
Which brings us to the current plan, We Will Chicago. Launched in 2020, plan adopted 2022. How is it different?
It represents a significant evolution, maybe even a break from past approaches. It's the first comprehensive plan since 1966, and its stated goals are explicitly about creating an inclusive, equitable vision for the entire city, focusing on neighborhood growth and well-being.
More community input.
That's a huge emphasis. Extensive community engagement, co-creation of the plan, trying to move away from that purely top-down model. And crucially, it formally acknowledges the historical harms caused by past planning decisions,
Mm.
particularly those that marginalized, segregated, and displaced communities of color, and aims to actively address those inequities.
So looking back, you see this persistent tension, don't you? Between prioritizing the big, downtown, often business-driven projects and addressing the needs and equity in the city's diverse neighborhoods.
Absolutely. That tension runs through much of 20th century Chicago planning. You see it in the critiques of the 58 plan, the 73 plan.
Yeah.
Chicago seems to be trying to consciously shift that balance towards citywide equity and neighborhood focus.
And Chicago still faces these deep, persistent challenges that planning has to grapple with. Deindustrialization.
Huge lasting impact. Job losses, particularly in manufacturing, led to increased inequality, concentrations of poverty, social dislocation in affected areas.
And segregation, still a major issue.
Sadly, yes. Chicago remains one of the most racially segregated major cities in the U.S., and it's crucial to understand this isn't just accidental. Historical planning decisions, where highways were routed, which neighborhoods were targeted for urban renewal, where public housing was cited, all played a significant role in creating and reinforcing these segregated patterns, with devastating long-term consequences for minority communities.
That urban renewal era after World War II, sometimes called slum clearance, what was the impact?
Massive demolition in many primarily black and lower-income neighborhoods. The stated intent was revitalization, but often it meant bulldozing existing communities, displacing residents with few affordable options to go elsewhere. And the cleared land was frequently redeveloped for different uses: university expansion, highways, convention centers, higher-income housing, which deepened the city's social and spatial divides.
Plus the impact of suburban sprawl and white flight draining resources from the city.
Right. A major challenge that some plans, like Chicago 21, tried to counteract by attracting residents back.
And even recent issues like downzoning, reducing density.
Yeah, that's a more recent concern raised by some urbanists and housing advocates. In certain desirable neighborhoods, particularly near transit, there's been a trend of replacing older, sometimes multi-unit buildings with very expensive single-family homes. This reduces overall density, makes housing even less affordable, and potentially limits access to those transit-rich areas for people who aren't wealthy. It raises real equity questions.
And the unique political structure, aldermanic privilege.
That's the system where individual city council members, the aldermen, have traditionally held significant, almost veto-like power over zoning changes and development projects within their own ward. Critics argue this can sometimes stifle coordinated citywide planning, create uncertainty for developers, and potentially lead to parochial decision-making rather than what's best for the city as a whole. It's been a long-standing debate.
So the legacy of Burnham's grand plans approach, it's complicated.
Very complicated. It undeniably gave Chicago iconic features, especially the lakefront park system. That's a huge positive. But applying that kind of large-scale, top-down intervention later in history, particularly with urban renewal or the construction of massive high-rise public housing projects, often resulted in severe social disruption, displacement, and exacerbated inequality, especially along racial lines.
A powerful lesson there. Grand visions need sensitivity to the ground level.
Exactly. They need to be tempered with genuine community engagement and a deep commitment to social equity, learning from the harm caused by past approaches that weren't.
Okay, let's focus specifically on the lasting physical impact of that 1909 Burnham Plan. Even though it wasn't fully implemented, it really left its mark, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
An indelible mark on Chicago's physical layout. You can still see its influence everywhere,
The lakefront has to be number one.
without a doubt. It's arguably the plan's most celebrated and enduring legacy. That incredible vast ribbon of public parkland along Lake Michigan, miles of beaches, parks, harbors, recreational spaces, largely created through landfill, as the plan proposed.
And Burnham's insistence on public access.
That was revolutionary for the time. The idea that this prime real estate by right belongs to the people. It's fundamental to Chicago's identity and quality of life. And initiatives today, like Building on Burnham, continue to invest in and enhance this incredible public asset.
The park systems, too. The forest preserves.
Yes, the plan built upon and solidified the push for an expanded park system, and the creation of the Cook County Forest Preserves, those large green belts surrounding the city, was largely realized based on its recommendations, providing access to nature for millions.
What about the street grid and transportation?
Key arterial street improvements are direct results of the plan's vision. We mentioned the widening of North Michigan Avenue, creating the Magnificent Mile. That dramatic change was a planned proposal. The construction of the bi-level Wacker Drive along the river, the widening of Roosevelt Road, the plan's principle of creating a more systematic arrangement of streets definitely influenced later infrastructure decisions.
But not the whole vision.
No, the full vision of cutting new diagonal streets across the grid mostly didn't happen, and the comprehensive regional transit system envisioned was significantly altered and overshadowed by the rise of the automobile, which the plan just didn't foresee dominating the way it did. Contemporary efforts are still grappling with how to improve transit connectivity, especially beyond the loop.
And public spaces, civic identity. The Civic Center wasn't built where planned.
True, the monumental Civic Center at Congress Halsted didn't happen. But the plan's emphasis on grouping public and cultural institutions did influence later developments. You see it in the creation of the museum campus in Grant Park, bringing the Field Museum, Shedd Aquarium, and Adler Planetarium together. The concentration of cultural buildings there. And even the recent success of the Riverwalk echoes those early ideas in the plan about activating the riverfront for public use.
So the legacy isn't just the specific projects built, but the ideas too.
Exactly. And that legacy isn't static. It's constantly being reinterpreted. Initiatives like Building on Burnham explicitly reference his blueprint, but apply it to 21st century needs, improving natural areas, expanding waterfront access, thinking about recreation differently.
And the current We Will Chicago plan, how does it relate?
It acknowledges the historical context and the positive aspects of the 1909 plan, like the lakefront commitment. But it also represents a conscious evolution, maybe even a correction. It prioritizes things the original plan largely omitted or downplayed, like racial equity, deep community input, addressing historical harms, focusing investment in underserved neighborhoods across the whole city.
So there's a trend towards greening and socializing that grand vision.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Integrating sustainability and ecological health much more deeply, and centering social equity, community well-being, and participatory processes. It's an evolution from plans that perhaps overemphasized monumental scale or pure efficiency, sometimes at the expense of ecological or social concerns.
Okay, putting Chicago in a global context, how does its story stack up historically? Where does it fit in the global pantheon of cities?
Well, it's probably not about saying Chicago is continuously top-ranked throughout history. That's a tricky, maybe unhelpful way to frame it. Cities rise and fall in prominence, but Chicago definitely had specific periods where its contributions were absolutely transformative on a global scale. It serves as this genuine crucible, a laboratory, where new urban paradigms were forged under the intense pressures of rapid growth, industrialization, catastrophe, and innovation.
But what are the key pillars of its global significance?
Okay, first, undeniably the birthplace of the modern skyscraper. That first Chicago school innovation with the steel frame, it fundamentally altered city skylines everywhere. That's a massive contribution.
Second, modernist architecture.
Yes, it became a crucial pioneer and international center for modernist architecture, especially during the second school era with Mies van der Rohe, Fazlur Khan, and SOM. The principles they developed, and especially Kahn's advanced structural systems like the tube frame, became fundamental to tall building design globally and remain so.
And third, the 1909 plan itself.
Yes. As we said, it's widely recognized as the first truly comprehensive plan for a major American city and its region. Its scope and ambition were groundbreaking. It directly influenced the development of urban planning as a professional field worldwide.
Comparing it helps see this. Paris under Haussmann
Was a direct inspiration for Burnham and the City Beautiful movement, especially the grand boulevards and axial layouts. Chicago then helped take those ideals and disseminate them even more widely, particularly in North America and beyond.
New York City, the eternal rival.
Constant comparison, especially with skyscrapers. While New York eventually built higher and more numerous skyscrapers, Chicago's first school generally gets credit for the crucial invention of the steel skeleton technology that made it all possible. Both cities developed unique skyscraper vernaculars. New York later took a lead in areas like comprehensive zoning.
Washington, D.C.
Burnham's own work on the Macmillan Plan there was key, applying and refining those Beaux-Arts, City Beautiful ideas on a grand national stage, which then fed back into the Chicago Plan.
And those colonial or new capital cities.
Right. Manila, Baguio, designed by himself. Canberra, influenced by Chicago ideas via Walter Burley Griffin. Ottawa, planned by Bennett. Even echoes in New Delhi. It shows how these City Beautiful ideals nurtured in Chicago were exported, often tied to American economic and political influence or the creation of new national identities.
So Chicago's place isn't about a simple rank, but about its role as this dynamic laboratory.
Exactly. A place where new urban and architectural ideas were conceived, tested, sometimes succeeding spectacularly, sometimes failing or having unintended consequences, and then disseminated globally, adapted to different contexts and needs. Its historical impact, particularly in the modern era, is undeniable.
And that story, that narrative, isn't finished, is it? Chicago is still evolving, still wrestling with its legacy, facing new challenges today.
Absolutely. The narrative continues to unfold. You see new trends, ongoing reinterpretations of that legacy, and concerted efforts to address complex contemporary challenges. Shaping the future involves innovation, sustainability, and crucially, social equity.
What are the current architectural trends we're seeing?
It's a blend, really. Definitely a strong focus on sustainability and green design. Chicago has actually been a leader in LEED-certified buildings and green roofs for a while.
Mm.
Millennium Park is a great example of integrating landscape and sustainability. Adaptive reuse of older buildings is also huge.
And new forms, beyond the glass box.
Yes, you see more experimentation with innovative forms and materials. Architects like Gene Gang of Studio Gang have made a global impact with buildings like the Aqua Tower and the St. Regis Chicago, known for their undulating facades and inspiration from nature. Steel and glass continue to evolve, but there's more exploration of texture, shape, and environmental response.
What are some key recent or ongoing projects shaping the city?
Well, those Gene Gang towers have definitely redefined the skyline recently. Then you have massive multi-billion-dollar developments like the 78 being built on 62 acres of former rail yards between the South Loop and Chinatown. It aims to be a whole new mixed-use neighborhood, residential, commercial research, green space, even a new CTA station. Huge ambition there.
And Lincoln Yards.
Similar scale, different location. Transforming former industrial land along the north branch of the river into another huge mixed-use district focused on tech, life sciences, entertainment, residential, with significant riverfront access and parkland. Both the 78 and Lincoln Yards are trying to embody 21st century ideas about sustainability and connectivity.
Any other major ones?
The Obama Presidential Center under construction in Jackson Park is hugely significant culturally, educationally, as a community hub, and as a potential catalyst for investment on the South Side. It's designed to be a global attraction.
And addressing downtown issues.
Yes, the LaSalle Reimagined initiative is actively exploring ways to convert vacant or underused office buildings in the historic LaSalle Street Financial Corridor into residential units, including affordable housing to bring more life back downtown post-pandemic.
Right.
Plus, ongoing infrastructure work like improvements at Union Station and other high-rise projects continuing.
Who are the leading architects or firms driving this now?
Gene Gang and Studio Gang are certainly among the most prominent internationally right now. SOM continues to be a major global player with deep Chicago roots. Todd Williams, Billy Cian Architects are designing the Obama Center. There's a vibrant mix of local and international talent.
And how is Burnham's legacy viewed or used today? Is it still relevant?
It definitely resonates, but it's being critically reinterpreted. We mentioned building on Burnham, which directly invokes his name and spirit to continue investing in the lakefront, the river, parks, public access, building on that core positive legacy.
But We Will Chicago takes a different approach.
It represents that conscious evolution. It acknowledges the 1909 plan's historical significance, but aims to correct its omissions and shortcomings, especially regarding equity and community voice. It moves deliberately away from a purely top-down approach towards co-creation and addressing historical harms. It's a dialogue with the Burnham legacy, not just a continuation of it.
There's also the Burnham Prize competition.
Right, held by the Chicago Architecture Center. It encourages architects and planners to reimagine aspects of the plan for the 21st century, often focusing on things like using data to address underserved areas, creating equitable transit solutions, finding new kinds of public spaces. It keeps the spirit of ambitious thinking alive, but applies it to today's pressing issues.
So the legacy evolves. Respect for the ambition, but critical reevaluation of the methods and outcomes.
Exactly. That trend towards greening and socializing the grand vision is key. Integrating sustainability and social equity, not as afterthoughts, but as core principles. It's an evolution, and in some ways a necessary correction, to earlier planning paradigms that might have prioritized monumentality or raw efficiency over ecological health or social well-being.
What are the big lessons Chicago's history offers for cities today?
Several powerful ones, I think. First, the enduring value of investing in visionary public spaces, the lakefront, is proof positive. Second, The absolute necessity of balancing grand visions with genuine community engagement and a deep commitment to social equity learning from the harm caused by past top-down approaches that ignored or displaced communities. Third, the importance of adaptive reuse in older industrial cities. Fourth, the ongoing challenge of aligning planning tools like zoning and transportation policy with market realities, sustainability goals, and equity outcomes, avoiding things like exclusionary downzoning near transit. And fifth, the imperative to directly confront and address the legacies of historical inequities, particularly racial segregation and economic disparity.
But challenges definitely remain.
Yeah.
Critics like Blair Kemen, the former architecture critic, have pointed out issues.
Yes, critiques about things like deferred maintenance on the lakefront, persistent inequality between north and south side investment, aging infrastructure, the difficulties posed by fragmented political control. These are real issues.
And the downtown vacancy problem post-pandemic.
A huge challenge for Chicago, like many big cities. How to adapt the central business district to new work patterns. Those office-to-residential conversion ideas are one response. And getting any large new project off the ground always faces hurdles, financing, regulations, community concerns, environmental reviews.
So the big challenge moving forward seems to be reconciling that Chicago tradition of making no little plans, these huge, ambitious projects like the 78 or Lincoln Yards, with this growing understanding and demand for truly community-centric development.
That's the crux of it, I think. How do you ensure that the next wave of large-scale transformation benefits existing residents, respects neighborhood character and history, avoids displacement, and genuinely contributes to a more equitable and sustainable city for everyone?
It's about integrating that top-down vision and capacity with an inclusive, bottom-up, community-driven approach.
That seems to be the lesson Chicago's long, complex, and fascinating history points towards. Finding that balance is key to its future.
So let's try and bring this incredible journey together. Chicago's story is just one of constant dynamic reinvention, isn't it?
Absolutely. Rising from the ashes of the fire, projecting this vision of order at the exposition, being shaped by Burnham's incredibly bold blueprint, and then revolutionized time and again by its architectural schools.
It really did serve as this urban laboratory, testing new ideas under immense pressure, industrialization, explosive growth, catastrophe transformation.
And its successes became global models. The lakefront commitment, the invention of the skyscraper, those changed cities everywhere.
But its struggles and failures, particularly around achieving equity, overcoming segregation, the impacts of displacement from some renewal projects, those offer critical cautionary lessons for cities everywhere, too.
It's not really about assigning an all-time ranking. That feels too simple, kind of anachronistic for history.
Yeah.
But Chicago was clearly in a very select group of cities that fundamentally reshaped global urbanism and architecture, especially during the modern era.
You can literally see its influence built into skylines around the world. It's embedded in planning practices, and it continues to inform the ongoing conversation about what cities can and should be.
And the story isn't over. It's still being written. Contemporary initiatives like We Will Chicago are actively trying to reconcile that historical legacy of grand ambition with the lived experiences of all its residents, trying to integrate that top-down vision with a more inclusive, community-driven approach and address those historical inequities head-on.
So, Chicago's enduring legacy. It's this powerful combination of monumental achievements and this persistent, often contested, continuously evolving quest to define the potential and maybe the pitfalls of the modern city.
A truly powerful story. Resilience, innovation, ambition, and complex transformation.
We've seen how these huge dramatic events like the fire and these grand visions like the Burnham Plan really shaped Chicago's trajectory. But we've also seen how the messy realities, social forces, economics, community needs, political fights shaped the city as it actually exists on the ground.
Yeah, it's that fascinating constant interplay between the deliberate design, the grand plan, and the unpredictable, complex reality of urban life.
So here's something to think about. As you look at your own city, or really any city you visit, what parts jump out at you as clearly the result of some deliberate plan? A park system, a highway, a zoning code.
And then where do you see the marks of other things? Unexpected events, maybe? Economic booms or busts? Or places where community efforts maybe push back against a plan or steer development in a completely different direction than originally intended?
How much of the city we actually experience today is truly by design? And how much is the result of the plan meeting and being shaped by that messy, complex reality on the ground?